Hi everyone, I am smiling huge because I have been so excited to film this tutorial. This is my new favorite thing to do. I love decorating cookies with royal icing, and I am going to show you the beginner basics of how to work with royal icing on either gingerbread or sugar cookies. If you want to see those recipes, go check out my gingerbread cookie recipe and my sugar cookie recipe because they turn out perfectly. They're no spread. They taste really good, but dang, I've been practicing this for at least a year, and I am so excited to show you. It's so therapeutic for me. I love this. I pull up a bar stool, I get my cookie, and you know, I'm filming a lot of the time, but I just get to sit there and just do these tiny little details, and it's relaxing. Now, I love cake decorating, but cake decorating is like intense. Like, you're standing and moving and sweating, and it's in and out of the freezer, and there's so many stages, so it's very labor intensive. These are labor intensive too, but it's a different kind. It's therapeutic for me. I love it. So I'm so glad that you're here with me today. I'm Amy, by the way, from Neurotic Mom Bakes. Welcome. Okay, so some tools you're going to need. Check out my royal icing recipe. I talk there about different consistencies, so you'll want to check that out and how to color and how to bag. But I have my royal icing here ready to go, and I have what I call the medium rare. You know how there's like steak is in, like, you can cook it in 5 different ways: rare, medium, so on. With royal icing, there's thin, medium thick, and thick. So I have a medium thin right here, just to show you that's the easiest way to start, I think, to show you just the basics of how to outline and flood. You also need what's called a scribe. I have these cute ones that I found online a while ago, or these really inexpensive ones that you can find on Amazon. And if you just don't have that on hand and you want to get going right away and don't want to go buy one or order one and wait, toothpicks also work. I like to keep, I'm going to need some scissors, and then I like to keep a wet rag on hand and some paper towels, either slightly damp or dry, because you need to frequently wipe off your scribe, and also you need to frequently kind of clean the tip of your icing bag, because if it sits even just for a few minutes, the icing kind of hardens and dries. So you'd want that there ready to go. And I forgot this. And then I like to just keep some glasses on hand, some mugs, so that when I'm done using it, I can put it in the mug, and it drips out a little bit, but it'll be on the bottom of the glass or the mug, and you don't have to clean off the counter. So that's what I like to do, because if you set it on the counter, it's just gonna run right out. Okay, let's start. Yay, I'm so excited. Now, I have my, what do I want to do first? I'm gonna do this. Let's start with the square, because straight lines are easier to do than curved lines. I want to let's just do this in a good old-fashioned white. So I've got my piping bag here and some scissors. Now, you can always cut the hole bigger, but you cannot make it smaller if you make it too big. You would just have to rebag it and start over. So we are going to start very small. There's a seam on the bag that I like to keep facing up when I cut. And I mean, we're talking the smallest amount, and you can kind of test it out. Now, that is very thin, which if you're doing teeny tiny detail, that would work. However, I'm just outlining and then flooding, so it can be a little, I think that's pretty good. Let's start with that. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to outline the cookie first, and royal icing is kind of elastic. It's not like buttercream. So what I mean by that is you want to keep the piping bag lifted off the cookie. You don't want the tip of the icing bag touching the cookie. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to start piping, and then I'm going to just give some gentle pressure, but do you see how I'm lifting and laying down the icing? It's just so much easier to control and get a straight line when you're lifting than if you're, let me just kind of show you, than if you're trying to draw a straight line. like that. It doesn't work as well. It comes out in different consistencies. My hand is a little bit shaky, so it's never gonna be this nice straight line. You wanna lift it. Now I can fix all this. When you're just outlining and flooding, you can fix anything. So don't worry on this part, this process. I'm just gonna, so start again. So I'm gonna lift, and you wanna go nice and slow, but can you see how I can lay that down just perfectly straight? And it's a thin line, the exact same, thin or thickness all the way across. You can see the difference between that and that. Okay, now I've got this outline. Now I'm gonna do what's called flooding. Oh, before I get to that, a lot of decorators, like cookie decorators, will have a thicker consistency for the outline and then a thinner for the flooding. I don't do that. 2 reasons. Number 1, you have to bag 2 different icings, and number 2, you often see that the line on the outside where I like to have a nice, smooth, completely uniform finish. Anyway, now what I'm gonna do is called flooding. And flooding, that is exactly what you do. You need a lot of icing. You want to go ahead and flood the cookie with the icing, okay? It's going much higher, much taller, thicker than the outline was. And you just kind of follow, there's no real set rules, but we just wanna kind of cover this. There, do you see how much icing I had there? Go in and fill in any gaps. Okay, now that looks far from perfect, right? Doesn't matter, that's totally fine. Because now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get my scribe, and I'm just gonna I don't wanna hold it like this, I wanna kind of keep it perpendicular to the cookie, and we're just gonna kind of swirl it around, kind of get into those corners. And you're just gonna fill in, you're gonna pop any air bubbles or fill in any gaps or holes, spaces. Okay, you can see over here how it's not completely smooth. So I'm just gonna get my scribe and kind of gently nudge it over, if that makes sense. And you can even pull it back a little bit. It was kind of bulging there. It's kind of like, I don't know what substance I can compare it to. It's just pliable. Okay, I think I want this out further towards the edge of the cookie. So see how I'm just kind of swirling it out? Now there is a reason why cookie decorators charge a lot per cookie, because this is not a quick process, but it is a fun, satisfying process. Okay, it's still not completely smooth, so you can either shake it back and forth like this, kind of drop it carefully, or you can stick your scribe in the middle and kind of shake it, circle it around. This is when I like to, and then if there's any air bubbles, just gently push them down. But eventually this is going to settle completely and be totally flat. If you find that your frosting is not smoothing out completely, it is because it's too thick. And these are easily fixable. All you need to do is just get a cake scraper or even a butter knife, and you just scrape it off and start again. It's easy to fix, so don't worry if it's, and it takes some time to kind of get the feel for what consistency you're looking for. Now we're gonna talk about a couple different techniques called wet on wet or wet on dry. So this is a really good example of wet on wet. So what I did is I flooded the areas of the pumpkin, and then immediately after flooding, I get the same consistency of icing, and I will do some designs on there, and it will sink into the initial layer so it's completely flat. Whereas this is a wet on dry. What I did here is I flooded the cookie, let it dry completely, and then I went back and put details on that, and you can see how it gives dimension. It's raised, okay? So we're gonna set this aside. If you're doing the wet on dry, what you need to do, you have to let this base layer dry completely. Couple ways you can speed it up. I had my oven on earlier actually, because I made gingerbread cookies, and it's turned off completely and it's cooled down significantly. So I can put this in my oven and it will dry it out much quicker, or you can stick it in front of a fan and that will dry it out. Otherwise, it takes at least an hour before you can go back and do some like 3D dimension design on here. If you're doing wet on wet, you need to work quickly. I'm gonna show you really quick what that looks like. Okay, before I get to that, let's talk about, so a square is pretty easy. Let's do a different shape here. Your scribe is your friend here because you're just gonna use that, and I will show you. So I have my green. We're gonna start very, very small. And I'll sometimes give it a little test. Oh, that's perfect. So when you have angles, you kind of want to stop each time you need to make a turn. You're going to push the tip down so it touches the cookie. So I touch it, and then I can lift and switch directions. Touch, lift, touch, lift. Does that make sense? So at each like corner, you are touching down to kind of stop the flow of the icing, if that makes sense. Okay, now I'm gonna kind of go fast on purpose and show you see how this side is not nearly as clean as this side. I'm gonna show you how that's just easily fixable. But first I'm gonna flood, okay? So not nearly smooth and clean enough. So I'm just gonna go in now with my scribe, and you can push this into the corners and just kind of lift it out like that, and you'll have a nice sharp corner. I mean, like kind of pull the icing out away from it. And this is where you can straighten out any areas you feel aren't as clean. You need to work, if you're gonna do a wet on wet, which I'm gonna show you right now, you need to work fairly quickly. And again, if you feel like your icing might be a little bit too thick, just cut a hole and squeeze it into a bowl, add a little bit more water, and just rebag it. It's not a big deal. Which mine actually might be, this green might be a tad thick. As you can see, those little points aren't going. But sometimes it just takes a good shake. A couple taps. If those dots aren't disappearing, which mine may not be, that's okay. Then I just rebag. In fact, let me show you just real quick how I would fix this, how I would start over. I'm just gonna scrape off my frosting. And don't worry, everything's gonna be covered again, so it doesn't matter what it looks like, okay? And even, let's say you get some frosting down on here. I'm gonna show you how to fix that too, okay? Almost everything is fixable. In fact, I made a giant gingerbread cookie the other day, and I just couldn't get the consistency right in the beginning. And I think I did the head. First it was too thick, then it was too thin, and it was running over the sides. I think I did the head 4 times, and I had to just keep scraping it off. You can also just kind of get a wet rag, clean wet rag. And if it's dried, I love this trick right here. Let's say you get fully decorated and you just kind of have this hard blob over here on the side. You just get like a little grater, and you can just grate it right off. Anyway, I would keep grating that to get all that frosting off, but you get the idea. Everything's fixable. So let's go back. This is where you want the wet rag. See, there'll be a little dried piece here. You just kind of pull that off, so this is ready to go again. Don't worry if it's not all the way out to the edge, because you can like get your little scribe and wiggle it out there. I'm going to show you a wet on wet technique. Let's see what that looks like. Make sure my scribe is clean. Another reason why it may not completely smooth out is you're not flooding enough. It's not thick enough. Okay, normally I would spend a little bit more time on that, but I want to show you kind of just what a wet on wet looks like. So let's get my red here. You want the seam side up. That'll just give a nice clean cut. So I'm just going to pipe some dots. I'm not completely touching the green. I'm keeping it slightly above. Okay, so what's going to happen is that red is going to settle down into the green, and it will give a completely smooth surface. And if you wanted to add some designs, like so let's say I want to make this into a little star, I will just get my little scribe and pull it, put it in the center. I'm not touching the bottom of the cookie. Ooh, my hands are a little shaky. I'm not touching the bottom of the cookies. You don't want crumbs to get in there, but that kind of gives you an idea of what. I give it a quick wipe in between if I don't want any of the green in the center of the red. If I didn't do that, and that's fine, it's just a different look. You can see how I have green in there rather than just the red. And then give it another little tap, shake, and it'll settle in. So there's your basic flooding and the wet on wet technique. Now, I want to show you, so that's our wet on wet technique. I want to show you how you get like dimension. Do you see how this looks like 3 panels? You can't flood it all at once and get that definition. So what you need to do is you need to get parts of the cookie that aren't touching and do those first. So I'm gonna make, let's get this little blue color. I'm gonna make it, see how the pumpkins are sectioned out? I'm gonna section out 3 different sections of the tree. And you can do all the same color, you can do different colors. I'm gonna mix it up and try some different colors. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do the bottom and the top sections first. First I'm gonna outline where I want it. I wanna kind of curve it around. Anytime you're not doing a straight line, you just wanna go extra, extra slow so you can lay that string of frosting out, you know, where you want it. And now I'm going to flood this. Okay, we're going to get my scribe here, and I'm just going to kind of nudge it. It's not as far out to the edge of the cookie as I want it to be, so I'm just going to kind of nudge it out a little bit. And again, we're not touching the cookie underneath. It's a nice thick layer of frosting, so you're able to manipulate it without touching the cookie underneath. Oh, I want to show you this too. Okay, so my blue's been sitting for a minute, probably about an hour, and so I have a little bit of that dye just kind of settled to the bottom. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it a good knead. I'm going to knead my bag, which is easy to do. I haven't cut a hole yet, but if you have cut your hole, just pinch the end with one hand and knead it with the other hand. And then you won't have it squirting out all over. In general, the flooding, outlining and flooding tip can be a tiny bit bigger than the thicker consistency. If you want the really fine detail, it needs to be really, really tiny. But the flooding, you need to push out a little bit more so you can cut it and get away with cutting it a little bigger. Oh, air bubble, but it's gonna be just fine. And if you're a beginner, even just doing these like 3 panels right here, just that makes a really cute, pretty cookie. You don't have to be a great artist. You don't have to have the super advanced skills. This is just so much fun to do. Okay, so I've done my 2 sections there. Now what I'm gonna wanna do is I'm gonna wanna let this dry completely. When you're just doing the side-by-side panels, you don't have to wait quite as long as you need to when you're doing a wet on dry right on top of it. When it's just next door to each other, it hardens enough that it'll keep that border and that ridge so that you get that kind of dimension of the panels, if that makes sense. So when this dries, and it will only take about 20 to 30 minutes, and again, you can speed it up in the oven or with the fan. I'll be able to do a brown trunk right here and then a different color here. I was gonna do green, but I think pink would be super cute. All right, now I just wanna show you what a wet on dry looks like. Just very basic. This is just, we're in the beginner stage here. This is just decorating with royal icing 101. I do want to show you this here because I don't do everything perfect all the time. I just want you to know. My white was just just a hair too thick because you can see these little bumps on the edge. Did not fully sink in. It's really smooth here, but it's not perfectly smooth here. So if I really wanted these to be perfect, if I were selling them or doing them, you know, as a gift for someone else, I would probably scrape that off and redo it. But for now, I'm gonna leave it. You can also pipe a border on and cover it. So lots and lots of options. But I'm gonna show you now that this was an oven that was turned off and cooled down quite a bit, and I just set it in an oven that was slightly warm. You can also turn it to like 100 your lowest setting and put it in there. I'm gonna show you what wet on dry looks. Let's just do some easy. This is where usually when you do the wet on dry, this is when I mean, this will be fine. Don't get me wrong. If you don't want to make different consistencies, let me just show you. This medium consistency is going to be just fine. But because it's a little bit looser, the dots will spread just a little bit. So just know that if you pipe out this teeny tiny dot and you want it to be really, really fine or a fine line, it will spread a little bit. If you want super ultra fine details, this is when you want the little bit thicker consistency. So let me show you that. I'm gonna pipe some really thin lines. I always like to test first. Now that is ultra, ultra fine. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so that's gonna hold its shape. That's gonna keep the thinness. If I wanted it a little bit thicker, let's see how the tiny dots I could pipe. I mean, tiny little details. I really like the way that looks. Let me do another. See if you kind of lift it and gently place it down. I'm going kind of fast for video sake, but if it gets a little bubbly there, just wipe it off and you can actually get your scribe and scrape that off. Because it's dry underneath, just be really careful, but you can start over. But I'm just let's cut this. I'll show you what a little bit bigger. Let's say I wanted to do like some holly berries. Actually, no, let's do this. I'm gonna pipe some lines, kind of like the veins for a leaf. If I wanted to do some berries and have really defined dimension, I would pipe the berries, like I wouldn't do them right next to each other. I wouldn't go down in a line. I would skip a space and I would let that dry for, just like 5 minutes. And then when I come back and pipe the berries in between all those spaces, you'll have very defined dots there. So just know that anything right next door to each other, you wanna let dry. You don't wanna pipe at the same time if you want the definition between something that's right next to something else. I hope that is making sense. So there is our wet on dry technique. So there's our just very basic Royal Icing Decorating 101. I am gonna finish this other cute tree because I think it's probably dry enough. Wet on dry, wet on wet, and just kind of, this is like, I don't even know what I would call this look. 3D, dimensional, side by side, I don't know. But kind of, these are like just the 3 very basic beginner techniques to try with Royal Icing. They're pretty forgiving. I'm not putting the Royal Icing right up next to that other icing. I'll use my scribe just to make sure I'm extra gentle. If I wanted to, on this pink part, while it's still wet, I could do a wet on wet something here, and then I could do some wet on dry on the green panels, green and blue. Make sure it's totally clean. And the trick when you're doing the side-by-side panels, to get that really defined look, you want a lot of icing. The trick is a lot of icing. It just takes a little bit of extra work to get it right where I want it. Okay, and I'm gonna give it a little shake. Be careful when you do that, otherwise it will break. That's just because my cookie's warm and it came out of the oven, just so you know. Usually I drop it and it's no problem. Okay, there you go. I'm gonna stop there, you get the idea. My cookie was a little warm. You need to let it cool completely before going in on it, because then the icing kind of firmed up a little too fast, but you get the idea. I just wanted to give you this idea of kind of the 3 basics. You have the side-by-side dimension, you have the wet on wet, and you have the wet on dry for your very basic Royal Icing Decorating 101. I will link my video to my Royal Icing recipe and my gingerbread and my sugar cookie recipe. And if you would like to see more tutorials like this one, just make sure you subscribe to my channel. Bye, we'll see you next time.